Welcome to Coming Together, Coming Apart. As you can probably tell, today is not our usual release day. That is because this is not a usual episode. Today is June 25th, 2020. 70 years ago, in the morning hours of June 25th, 1950, the armed forces of North Korea crossed the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea, setting into motion the deadliest part of the conflict we've just started talking about last week. To spoil a future episode of the main series, please remember that the war has never ended. A peace treaty has never been signed between the two Koreas, just the armistice of 1953. The Korean people are still divided by a line that was originally artificial and unnatural, but hardened through the blood and tears of soldiers and civilians from both sides of the conflict. That's why I think it is important to discuss the causes and implications of the conflict that drove a wedge between a formerly unified people, and that's why I've started this project, to give as full an account as is possible of the war and how it came to be in the first place. On June 25, 1950, headlines across the United States read similarly to that of my hometown paper, the Chicago Daily Tribune. Going to print just hours after the first reports of invasion came in, Korean Red Strikes South hung in blocky ink over the only information worth printing at the time from the Associated Press. What was printed the next day, on the 26th, I think is much more interesting. It was written by one of the Tribune's own correspondents, who was in Seoul to cover the opening of the South Korean National Assembly. It's not intended to be anything profound. I just think an important part of understanding history is understanding how people talked about these events as they happened. On that day, one day after the invasion began, the Tribune's front page read, in bold, capitalized letters, "Drive Reds Back in Korea." As written by Walter Simmons, filed in Uijeongbu, South Korea. This is how the Korean Civil War looks in the muddy rice fields and slippery mountains where it is being fought. Two divisions of khaki-clad infantry are pushing north this morning to regain the ground lost yesterday. Every kind of transport is being used, from modern American trucks to ancient Japanese buses and taxicabs. The road from Seoul, 12 miles to the south, is choked with a motley array of vehicles, some broken down. A trainload of troops has just pulled in. Two Russian-built North Korean tanks clanked 25 miles and almost overran this grimy village on the main invasion route. 20 more Red tanks are approaching today, but the enemy has not moved up his infantry. More than 60,000 refugees spent last night plodding through the rain toward Seoul, but today many are heading northward again. Their faces are blank with suffering and hunger. Nearly every woman carries a child on her back. A handful of American military advisors is unshaven and exhausted after a sleepless night. Each of them had at least one close brush with death yesterday. Lieutenant John Ayresman of Peoria, Illinois, was trapped at Pocheon, 9 miles south of the border, when tanks overran the defense positions. He slammed his jeep into a flooded rice paddy and managed to escape, covered with mud, by a side road. Captains Lee Kelly of Denver and Elmer Howery of San Diego were bracketed by shell fire and narrowly escaped. A lieutenant has not been reported since his jeep was destroyed by machine gun fire at Pocheon. The North Korean tank attack was so vicious that the situation was grave at 9 o'clock last night. Standing at a crossroads north of here, the Americans watched a panic-stricken battalion flee southward towards Seoul. Of the two regiments defending Seoul, one was chewed up. The confused fighting had scenes of both bravery and cowardice. One company stood off an enemy regiment for 5.5 hours. Other troops ran in the face of the tanks. Captain Howery chased one anti-tank crew 1.5 miles, turned it around, and put it back into the battle. The panicky troops fled without carrying out the prepared plan to blow up bridges. Cowardly officers suddenly became doubtful that their bazookas would destroy tanks. A battalion of artillery was lost when its anti-tank protection fled. At Pocheon, large stores of ammunition and gasoline were lost. Enemy tanks, some of which were believed piloted by Russians, filled up on the fuel and shells. The attackers' losses have been huge. At one place, hundreds were slaughtered when they made a head-on attack with bugles blowing. Thousands of Southern troops are missing, but many are emerging from the hills and reassembling. Other headlines throughout the 4 or so pages of coverage of the nascent conflict read, President and top advisors confer, no comment. UN ceasefire order issued in Korea invasion. Formosa next step in Red penetration, Aussie chief says. Soviets report North invaded by South Korea. And Yanks in Tokyo sit tight and ask, is this it? All the events described by these headlines we will discuss in a few weeks. as we begin to discuss the conduct of the war itself. For now, I ask that you take a moment to reflect on the day and the many victims of the war, no matter who they fought for and especially if they did not fight at all. We will return to our regularly scheduled programming next Tuesday with Episode 3, Original Sin. Thank you for listening.